It was an ordinary evening by the coast, the kind of day when the sea looked calm and the air smelled of salt and peace. Emily walked home from the small hospital where she worked as a nurse, her white shoes softly touching the quiet road. She had finished a long shift, smiled at her patients, and waved goodbye to the night staff, to everyone. She was just Emily, the gentle girl who helped others, always calm, always kind. But what no one knew was that Emily's life wasn't as simple as it seemed. Her older brother, Ryan, had once been a Navy SEAL, a soldier trained for missions no one talked about. He had left the military a few years ago, tired of war and wanting peace. He came back home with quiet eyes and a heavy heart, never speaking much about what he had seen. Emily often teased him, calling him Mr. Silent, and he'd smile, saying, "Silence keeps you alive." That evening, Ryan was fixing his old boat near the dock. The golden light of sunset fell across the waves. Emily had promised to bring him dinner after work, something simple, soup and bread. She always kept her word. She hummed softly as she walked, the plastic container warm in her hands. She didn't notice the dark figures waiting at the corner of the street. The small coastal town was usually safe. People left their doors unlocked. Shop owners knew everyone's name, but lately, a few rough men had started coming around, new faces who drank too much and caused small trouble at the bar. They weren't from town and no one liked them much. But no one did anything either. They laughed loudly, cursed, and scared the locals. As Emily turned down a quiet lane, she felt a strange chill run through her. The streetlight above flickered weakly. Her phone was in her bag, but she didn't think she'd need it. It was only a few more minutes to her house. She heard footsteps behind her, slow at first, then quicker. She turned her head slightly. 3 men were walking the same way. Laughing in low voices, Emily told herself it was nothing, just people heading home. She tried to stay calm. Her pace quickened. The laughter grew louder. One of the men shouted, "Hey nurse, wait up!" She ignored him, kept walking. The sound of shoes hitting the ground grew faster. Before she could think, one of them stepped in front of her. Blocking her path, he smelled of alcohol, his breath heavy. "Where you going so fast?" he said with a grin. Another one circled around, holding a bottle. The third stood behind her, too close. She took a step back, her heart beating hard. "Please move, I just want to go home," she said softly. The man in front leaned closer. "Home? Don't be shy, we just want to talk." His hand brushed against her arm. Emily pulled away. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice shaking. They laughed louder now. One of them said, "Oh, the little nurse has some fire," and before she could run, he kicked her hard in the side. She stumbled, falling to the ground. The soup container flying from her hand, her head hit the edge of the pavement, pain exploding behind her eyes. The men froze for a second, realizing she wasn't moving. Then one of them cursed. "Let's get out of here." They ran, their footsteps fading into the night. The street was silent again. The soup spilled across the ground, mixing with blood. Minutes passed before a fisherman walking home saw her lying still. He rushed to her side, calling her name, though he didn't know it. Her phone buzzed in her bag, Ryan's name flashing on the screen. He was calling to ask where she was, but there was no answer. Only silence and the sound of waves crashing softly nearby. Back at the dock, Ryan frowned and looked toward the town. Something didn't feel right. Years of training had taught him to trust his gut. He wiped his hands, picked up his jacket, and started walking toward the street. The wind blew cold against his face. He didn't know yet that his sister was lying in the hospital he had just driven past that morning. That night, the small coastal town felt different. The peace that everyone loved had broken. The news spread fast. A nurse attacked on her way home. No one saw who did it, but everyone was afraid. People locked their doors for the first time in years, and whispered in fear. At the hospital, the nurses worked to save one of their own. Emily's hair was stained with blood, her breathing uneven. When Ryan arrived at the emergency entrance, he saw the lights flashing and something inside him turned cold. He didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't shout. He just stood there, his eyes fixed on the hospital doors, waiting to hear if his sister was still alive. Outside, the sea kept moving like nothing had happened. The waves rolled in and out, calm, gentle, endless, but in Ryan's heart, a storm had begun, one that no one could stop. The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the sound of rain hitting the pavement. The fisherman who found Emily had already called an ambulance. His hands trembled as he held a small towel against her bleeding head. She looked so peaceful it was terrifying. Her lashes wet, her lips pale, he whispered, "Stay with me, miss, stay with me," but she didn't move. The ambulance arrived within minutes, its siren crying through the empty streets. 2 paramedics jumped out, lifting Emily onto a stretcher. Her pulse was weak but steady. One of them, a young man named Chris, recognized her immediately. "She works with us," he said quietly. "She's one of the nurses." His partner nodded. "Let's move." Back at the hospital, doctors rushed her into the emergency ward. Nurses who had shared lunch with her that very morning were now crying as they worked to keep her alive. The head doctor, Dr. Patel, gave clear orders: no delay, head trauma. Internal bleeding possible. The team worked like a machine, fast and focused, but in their eyes there was pain. Outside the ward, Ryan arrived moments later. He had followed the flashing lights of the ambulance, something inside him pushing him forward. When he stepped through the doors and saw Emily on the stretcher, his world stopped, the air left his lungs. His hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles turned white. He wanted to shout, but no sound came. A nurse placed a hand on his shoulder. "Ryan, she's alive. But it's serious," he nodded slowly. Eyes locked on his sister. Machines beeped softly, echoing through the hallway like tiny heartbeats. He didn't speak, he didn't ask questions. He just stared, memorizing the faces of the doctors, the smell of antiseptic, the sound of wheels rolling over the tile. Every detail burned into his mind while Emily fought for her life inside. The police were already on the scene. The same alley where the attack happened was now surrounded by flashing blue lights. Officer Daniels bent down. Studying the ground, he found a broken bottle, a shoe print in the mud, and a piece of a necklace. Small, silver, shaped like a cross. He placed it in a plastic bag. "We'll find them," he said, but even he didn't sound sure. The town woke up to the news before sunrise. In the local cafe, people whispered, "Emily, the nurse, she's in the hospital." Some said it was random. Others said it was revenge for something no one understood. Fear spread faster than the truth. Doors stayed locked, and parents warned their daughters not to walk alone. Back in the hospital room, Emily's heartbeat stabilized. The doctors managed to stop the internal bleeding, but she was still unconscious. Her face was bruised, her head wrapped in white bandages. Ryan sat beside her bed, not moving for hours. The rhythmic sound of the monitor was the only thing keeping him calm. He reached out, gently holding her hand. "You're strong, Em," he whispered. "You always were." His voice broke for the first time in years. Memories flooded back. The day she fell off her bike and refused to cry. The time she waited 3 days for him to come home from deployment. The letters she sent when he was overseas. She had always believed he could protect her, and now he had failed. That thought hit him harder than any bullet ever had. He looked at her bruised face and felt something old awaken inside him, something he had buried after leaving the military. It was a quiet fury, cold, steady, and unstoppable. He stood up and walked out into the hallway, finding Officer Daniels by the nurse station. "Did you find them?" Ryan asked. His tone was calm, but his eyes were sharp. The officer shook his head. "Not yet, but we're working on it." Ryan nodded slowly. "You'll need to be fast," he said softly, then turned and walked away. Outside, the rain had stopped. The streets were wet and shining under the pale light of dawn. Ryan stood near the edge of the parking lot, staring at the empty road. His reflection trembled in the puddles. He could hear Emily's faint voice in his memory laughing, saying, "Promise me you'll never get in trouble again." He took a deep breath and whispered to the wind, "I'm sorry, sis, not this time." Far from the hospital, in a small apartment above the bar, the 3 men sat nervously. The oldest one, Jared, held an ice pack to his knee. "We shouldn't have done that," he muttered. The second, Mike, poured another drink, trying to act brave. "Relax. No one saw us," he said. "She'll be fine." Probably the youngest one. Leo stayed silent, staring at his shoes. He wasn't sure why he felt cold even with the heater on. They didn't know who Emily's brother was. They didn't know that Ryan had spent years tracking dangerous men in foreign countries, or that he could follow a trail most people couldn't even see. They didn't know that by hurting his sister. They had woken up the one man they should have left sleeping. That night, while Emily lay under soft hospital lights, Ryan sat by her again, his hand resting gently on her wrist. He whispered, "Rest now, Em, I'll handle the rest." His voice was calm, but his eyes were not. They carried the same quiet. Promise every SEAL learns to keep, the kind that ends with justice. And somewhere deep inside him a storm began to rise. one that would not stop until every shadow of that night was burned away. Ryan sat on the old wooden chair by the hospital bed, his elbows resting on his knees. The ticking clock on the wall was the only sound in the quiet room. He had been sitting there since midnight, not moving, not sleeping every few minutes. He looked up to see if Emily's fingers would twitch, but they didn't. The doctors had said she was stable now, but still unconscious. Words like head trauma and recovery time floated around him. They didn't mean much to him. All that mattered was her heartbeat on the monitor. That soft, steady beep was the only thing keeping him calm. Ryan had seen worse in war. Men broken, bodies torn. But this was different. This was home. This was his little sister. The one who used to wait for him by the window every night when he was deployed. The one who sent him letters that smelled of the ocean and vanilla. He rubbed his eyes, tired, his mind racing back and forth. He remembered her laughter, her voice saying, "Promise me you'll never get into trouble again, Ryan," he had promised. But now that promise felt like a chain. He wanted to keep it. But his heart was already breaking it. His phone buzzed on the table beside him. The screen lit up with a name, Officer Daniels. Ryan picked it up slowly, his voice low. "Yeah, Ryan," the officer said. "We found something you need to see." He stood, grabbed his jacket, and looked once more at Emily. "Be right back, sis," he whispered, touching her hand gently. Her fingers were warm, and that small warmth gave him strength. Outside, the early morning sun was rising behind the hospital. The streets were still wet from last night's rain. Ryan's boots splashed through puddles as he walked toward his truck. The world looked peaceful, but his chest felt like it was full of fire. At the police station, Officer Daniels placed a small plastic bag on the table. Inside was a silver cross pendant. Ryan recognized it immediately. It was Emily's. He had given it to her when she graduated nursing school. He looked up, his jaw tight. "Where did you find it?" "In the alley," Daniel said. "She must have been wearing it when they attacked." Ryan stared at the pendant for a long time. Memories hit him. Emily laughing, touching that necklace like it was lucky. Now it was just evidence, Daniels continued. "We're reviewing camera footage from nearby shops, but there's not much to see." Ryan nodded slowly. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "You'll find them," he said. Daniels frowned. "We'll do our best, but it might take time." Ryan looked straight into his eyes. "Then I'll help you." The officer sighed. "Ryan, I know your background, but let us handle this." Ryan smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. "Of course," he said. But both men knew he didn't mean it. He left the station without another word. The cool breeze brushed against his face. He walked to his truck and sat there for a moment, staring at his reflection in the mirror. The eyes looking back at him were not peaceful. They were the eyes of the man he used to be. He opened the glove compartment and pulled out a small black box. Inside were his old SEAL tags, scratched and dull. He hadn't looked at them in years, but now, holding them felt like shaking hands with an old part of himself, a part that knew exactly how to find people who didn't want to be found. He put the tags back carefully, then drove toward the alley where Emily had been attacked. The road was empty, the morning sun making long shadows across the cracked pavement. He parked a few feet away and stepped out. The air smelled faintly of salt and old trash. He crouched down, scanning the ground, a few drops of dried blood, a broken lighter, cigarette butts. But something else caught his eye, a muddy footprint, large, heavy. He leaned closer, studying it. The tread pattern was unique, maybe military boots or work boots. He took a photo with his phone. Ryan stood up and looked around. He could almost see it happening again. Emily walking, 3 men stepping out of the shadows. His jaw clenched as the image burned into his mind. He whispered under his breath, "I'll find you." Back at the hospital later that evening, Emily's condition hadn't changed. Ryan sat beside her again, his hands folded. A nurse entered quietly, checking the machines. She looked at Ryan with soft eyes. "She's strong," she said. "She'll wake up soon." Ryan nodded. "I know." When the nurse left, he leaned closer to Emily. "Listen, Em," he whispered. "You don't have to worry about anything. I'm not the same as before. Well, I'm going to find the people who did this." His voice stayed gentle, but every word carried steel underneath. Outside the hospital window, the sea was dark and endless. The same sea Ryan used to dive into during training. He could hear the waves crashing softly in the distance. It reminded him of something one of his instructors used to say. Calm waters hide dangerous depths. That night, as the hospital lights dimmed, Ryan stood and walked out. He didn't look back. The wind picked up. Carrying the smell of rain and salt through the streets, his boots made no sound on the wet road. He had made his decision. The police might look for evidence, but Ryan would look for them. He wasn't angry anymore. Anger burned too fast. This was colder, quieter, more precise. He had a mission again, and this time it was personal. The night was quiet, too quiet for a coastal town. Ryan stood on the porch staring at the horizon. The sea was calm, but inside him a storm was growing. He had spent the whole day watching Emily sleep, listening to the sound of machines. Now he couldn't sit still anymore. He went back to his old shed near the dock. It smelled of salt, wood, and oil. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, flickering weakly. He opened a metal box that hadn't been touched in years. Inside lay his old Navy SEAL gear, not weapons, but tools, a compass, a flashlight, a pair of gloves, and a small notebook. He picked up the gloves and stared at them. They still fit perfectly. Ryan didn't believe in luck. He believed in skill and timing. He pulled on a black jacket, tied his boots, and stepped outside. His footsteps were silent, his eyes alert, every sense awake. Every sound sharp. The streets were almost empty. Only a few lights glowed from small houses and the old bar at the corner. That bar, the same one the attackers had come from. He knew he'd have to start there. He began walking toward it, slow and steady. Inside the bar, laughter and music spilled through the cracked door. Men shouted, glasses clinked. The air smelled of smoke and beer. Ryan stopped outside, taking a deep breath. He wasn't angry anymore, he was focused. He could feel his heartbeat slow down, his breathing even out. Old training coming back like it never left. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The noise didn't stop, no one noticed him at first. He moved to a dark corner and sat quietly. From there he could see everyone, every face. Every move. He didn't need to speak. He just listened at the far end of the bar. 3 men were laughing too loudly. One of them had a bandage on his knee. Ryan's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't move, not yet. He listened as the man bragged. Yeah, she dropped like a doll. Didn't even fight. The others laughed. One said, hope she learned her lesson. Ryan's grip on his glass tightened. The sound of his pulse filled his ears. He stood slowly. His chair didn't make a sound. He walked to the bar counter, pretending to order another drink. Then he turned, his voice calm but cold. You boys from around here? The one with the bandage smirked. Who's asking? Ryan smiled faintly. Just a local. The men laughed again. But then they saw his eyes, steady, unblinking and full of something dangerous. The laughter faded, replaced by silence. Ryan stepped closer. He placed a photo on the table. Emily's photo. Recognize her? He asked softly. No one answered. One of them tried to look away. Ryan leaned closer. You should. She's the nurse you kicked in the head. The man froze. The color draining from his face, the others shifted uncomfortably. Ryan's voice dropped even lower. You'll tell me everything. Right now. Before they could react, Ryan grabbed the nearest one by the collar. He didn't punch him, he just pulled him close enough to whisper. You don't know what you started. The man's hands trembled. I didn't mean to, he stuttered. Ryan let go, his eyes still cold. You should have thought about that before. The bartender, an older man named Jack, watched silently. He knew Ryan from years ago. He also knew not to interfere. Ryan nodded slightly to him, then turned back to the men. You're going to take me to the others. They hesitated. Ryan said nothing more, he just stared. After a few seconds, one of them broke. Okay, he said, we'll take you outside. The air was cold, the moon high above. Ryan followed them down the narrow streets. Their footsteps echoed softly. The town slept, unaware of what was happening in its shadows. They stopped behind an abandoned warehouse near the docks. This is where they hang out, one of the men whispered. Ryan looked at the broken windows, the graffiti-covered walls. He could hear faint voices inside, laughter again. He nodded once. Stay here, he said. The men didn't argue. They were too scared to move. Ryan stepped through the half-open door. Inside, 3 more men sat around a table playing cards. When they saw him, they froze. He spoke quietly. I'm looking for the ones who hurt my sister. One of them stood up, pretending to be brave. Who the hell are you? Ryan's expression didn't change. Someone who doesn't ask twice. The first man reached for a bottle. But before he could lift it, Ryan moved. Fast, silent, efficient, the bottle hit the ground. The table flipped in less than a minute. It was over. No one dead, but no one standing either. He looked down at them, breathing steady. "You'll go to the police tomorrow," he said softly. "And confess. And if you don't," he added, his voice like ice, "I'll come back." He turned and walked out. Behind him, the men groaned on the floor. Outside, the wind carried the smell of the ocean again. Ryan stood for a moment, staring at the waves. Then he whispered, "For you, Emily." When he returned to the hospital just before sunrise, Emily was still asleep, peaceful and quiet. He sat down beside her and took her hand again. The night had been long, but the hunt had just begun. The morning sun touched the hospital windows. Emily's room was quiet. Her breathing steady, Ryan sat beside her, watching the light move across her face. Her skin looked pale but peaceful. She hadn't woken yet, but he felt she could hear him somehow. He whispered softly, "You'd laugh if you saw me now, Em." His lips curved in a tired smile. "You always said I couldn't stay out of trouble." He squeezed her hand gently. "I guess you were right." Outside, the town was slowly waking up. Fishermen prepared their boats. Shopkeepers lifted their shutters. Everyone tried to forget what happened, but Ryan couldn't forget. Not for a single second. He had names now. The man with the bandage, Jared, had told him about a group that often came down from another town, a group that caused chaos wherever they went. They called themselves the Pack, a name meant to sound strong, but to Ryan it sounded pathetic. He knew their kind, and loud when drunk, silent when scared. They didn't understand real strength, real discipline. He had met men like them in war zones, bullies who hid behind noise and numbers, and he had dealt with them before. By afternoon, Ryan was at the docks. He talked to an old fisherman who knew everyone's faces. When Ryan showed a photo of Jared, the man nodded. "Yeah. Saw him with 2 others last week. They left town yesterday morning." "Any idea where they went?" Ryan asked. The fisherman scratched his beard. "Maybe Red Harbor, 2 hours north." Ryan nodded. "Thanks." He drove out of town. The road was long and quiet. The sea stretched endlessly to his right. The wind whipped through the open window. Each mile that passed felt like a heartbeat closer to justice. Red Harbor was not a friendly place. It was rough, full of men who didn't like questions, bars, repair shops, and half-broken boats lined the shore. Ryan parked his truck near an old motel. He looked around carefully, studying faces, noticing details. A man smoking near a warehouse, another with bruised knuckles. He was searching for patterns, signs of the Pack. He entered the small diner across the street, ordered a coffee, and sat near the window. A waitress came by, nervous smile on her face. "Passing through?" she asked. "Looking for some old friends," Ryan said calmly. She nodded slowly. "The kind of friends who start fights?" Ryan gave a faint smile. "Maybe." She leaned closer, her voice low. "You might find them near the docks at night, behind the fish yard." Ryan nodded. "Thank you." He left a large tip and walked out. His pace steady, his eyes sharp. Night came fast, the air grew colder. The fog rolled in from the water. Ryan moved silently through the narrow paths between warehouses. He could hear laughter again, and that same careless laughter. It made his blood go cold. He peeked through a broken window. Inside, he saw 5 men, drinking, playing cards, talking loudly. One of them had a familiar scar across his cheek. Ryan recognized him from a photo he had seen on a police board years ago. A small-time criminal wanted for assault. Now part of the Pack, Ryan waited. Patient like a predator, he watched their movements, listened to their words. They were talking about Emily, joking about how she got what she deserved. Ryan closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them again, the calm soldier had returned. He moved to the side door. It creaked softly as he pushed it open. The men didn't notice at first, then one turned, squinting through the dim light. "Who the hell?" he began. Ryan was already inside. He didn't shout, didn't threaten. He spoke in a quiet voice that carried more danger than any scream. "Which one of you was at the coast last week?" The room fell silent. No one answered. Ryan took a step closer, his boots echoing softly. "I said," his voice steady. "Which one of you hurt my sister?" The man with the scar stood up, puffing his chest. "Who's asking?" he said. Ryan smiled faintly. "Her brother." The fight that followed wasn't loud. It was fast, sharp, and silent. The men never had a chance. Ryan didn't fight like them. He moved with precision. Every hit was controlled, every move exact, within minutes. The room was filled with groans and broken furniture. He left them alive, but barely. One of them crawled toward the door. Ryan crouched beside him, his voice calm. "You're going to tell the police everything." The man nodded quickly. Fear in his eyes, Ryan stood, breathing steady. He looked around one last time, then walked out into the fog. Behind him, the men didn't move. They knew better than to follow. Outside, the night air felt heavy but clean. Ryan leaned against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment. He wasn't proud of what he had done, but he didn't regret it either. As he walked back to his truck, his phone buzzed. It was a message from the hospital. Emily moved her hand. He froze, reading it twice. Then, for the first time in days, he smiled. He looked at the dark sky and whispered, "Hang in there, sis. I'm almost done." The sea waves crashed softly behind him, and for the first time since the attack, Ryan felt hope rising with the tide. The next morning came quietly. The sun was hidden behind gray clouds. The sea looked still, but Ryan's heart wasn't. He had names, faces, and a promise to keep. He sat in his truck outside the hospital. Emily was still unconscious, but her hand had moved. That small sign gave him strength. He touched the small silver cross he'd found in the alley. Her necklace, her memory, her reason, he whispered, "You rest, Em. I'll finish this." Then he started the engine and drove away. He wasn't driving aimlessly anymore. He knew where the last few members of the pack were hiding. The police had done their part. 2 men were in custody, bruised and terrified. But there were still 3 left. The ones who started it. The ones who laughed the loudest. Ryan didn't want revenge. He wanted justice, the kind that leaves no room for evil to grow again. He had spent years learning how to track people. He remembered every lesson, every instinct. Now those skills were back, sharp and alive. He parked near an abandoned bar outside Red Harbor, the same bar where the pack usually met. The sign above the door hung crooked, half broken by the wind. Inside, muffled voices echoed through the walls. He stepped out slowly, his boots silent on the gravel. The door creaked as he pushed it open. The air smelled of sweat, beer, and fear. 3 men sat inside. One looked up, recognizing him instantly. The color drained from his face. Ryan closed the door behind him. The sound of the latch locking echoed in the small room. He said calmly, "We need to talk." The men stood, one reaching for a knife. Ryan's eyes stayed steady, his voice colder now. "You won't need that." The man swung anyway. But Ryan moved like water, smooth and fast. He twisted the man's wrist and sent the knife flying. The second man charged, shouting. Ryan sidestepped and pushed him into the wall. The third man tried to run. Ryan caught him by the collar, pulling him back. "No running this time," he said quietly. They all froze, breathing hard, faces pale. The fight was already over. They just hadn't realized it yet. Ryan stood still for a long moment. He didn't need to shout. His silence was louder than any scream. He looked at each of them one by one. "You hurt a woman who saved lives," he said. "You thought no one would care," the man with the broken wrist whispered. "We didn't mean to." Ryan's voice cut through the air. "You meant every second of it." His tone wasn't angry. It was heavy, final, like a door closing forever. He stepped closer to the one who had kicked Emily. The man trembled, eyes wide. "You remember her?" Ryan asked softly. "She was walking home, carrying soup." The man said nothing, tears forming. Ryan leaned closer. "Now you remember what you did." He didn't hit them again. He didn't have to. Sometimes silence is punishment enough. He walked to the door and paused. "You'll go to the police," he said. "You'll confess. All of you." One of them shook his head. Ryan turned slowly, his eyes colder than the sea outside. "Then I'll come back," he said simply. They understood, fear replacing arrogance. He left the bar quietly, the sound of his boots fading into the distance. Behind him, no one moved. They just stood there, shaking, realizing what they had done. Outside, the wind picked up. It carried the smell of salt and rain. Ryan looked up at the dark sky. He felt no pride, no relief, only peace, the kind that comes after doing what must be done. He drove back to the hospital as the first drops of rain began to fall. When he walked inside, the nurses looked surprised. He looked tired but calm. Dr. Patel approached him, smiling gently. "She's awake," he said. Ryan froze for the first time in days. His heart raced, but this time, it wasn't anger. He walked quickly to her room. When he entered, Emily was there, eyes half open, weak but alive. She looked at him and tried to smile. Her voice was soft and broken. "You look awful," he laughed, tears filling his eyes. "You should see the other guys." She frowned faintly. "Ryan, what did you do?" He sat beside her, taking her hand. "Nothing you need to worry about," he said. She squeezed his hand weakly. "Promise me you didn't do something stupid." He smiled. "No, Em. I did something right." The machines beeped softly around them. The storm outside grew louder, rain tapping against the windows. But for Ryan, everything felt quiet again. His mission was done, his sister was safe, and justice had found its way back home. He leaned back in the chair, closing his eyes for a moment. Emily watched him, whispering softly, "You always keep your promises." He smiled faintly. "Always." Outside the hospital, the rain washed the streets clean. The town slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, and the name The Pack slowly faded from every whisper. Because everyone now knew, you don't hurt a Navy SEAL's family and walk away. The rain had stopped by morning. A thin layer of fog floated above the streets. The town felt lighter, as if it could finally breathe again inside the hospital. Emily was sitting up for the first time. Her face still pale, but her eyes brighter than before. Ryan sat near her bed, sipping cold coffee. He hadn't slept in 2 days, but his mind was calm. Emily smiled weakly. "You stayed all night again?" Ryan nodded. "Didn't want to miss the sunrise," she laughed softly. "You never change." He smiled, but his eyes were distant. His thoughts were somewhere else, outside, where justice was still unfolding at the police station. Officer Daniels was filling out reports. 3 more men had turned themselves in that morning. They came bruised, trembling, and silent. They confessed everything: the attack, the night, the fear. Daniels listened, his brows furrowed, when one of them whispered, "He told us to confess." Daniels asked, "Who?" The man's voice cracked. "Her brother." Daniels leaned back, staring at the wall for a long moment. He had known Ryan for years. He had heard stories about his time in the Navy, how he could track anyone, anywhere, and now he had seen it for himself by noon. The story had spread across the small town. People talked in quiet voices at the diner. "The men who hurt the nurse turned themselves in," one said. "Her brother must have scared them straight," another added. But no one judged him. In their eyes, what he did wasn't revenge, it was protection. Ryan stood outside the hospital, watching the clouds drift away. He could hear the sound of the ocean in the distance for the first time in days. It didn't sound sad, it sounded peaceful. He closed his eyes and let the wind brush against his face. Dr. Patel came outside to join him. "She's lucky," he said softly. "Most people with that kind of head injury don't wake up so soon." Ryan nodded. "She's strong," the doctor smiled. "You both are." Ryan didn't answer. He just looked at the sky. Inside, Emily was talking to a nurse. Her voice still weak but full of gratitude. "She saved so many lives," the nurse said. "It's good to see her healing now." Emily smiled faintly. "I just want to go home." A few hours later, Officer Daniels arrived at the hospital. He found Ryan sitting alone near the cafeteria. "Ryan," he said quietly, "we need to talk." Ryan looked up, calm as ever. "I guessed you'd come." Daniels sat across from him. "The men confessed," he said. "They said you found them." Ryan didn't deny it. "I didn't hurt them," he said simply. "I just reminded them what they did." Daniels sighed. "You know this could have gone differently." Ryan nodded. "It could have, but it didn't." The officer leaned back, studying him. "You broke no law technically," he said, "but you sure bent a few." Ryan gave a small smile. "Then I'll take the bend." Daniels couldn't help but chuckle. "You haven't changed a bit." Ryan looked at him seriously. "Some things shouldn't change that night." Ryan walked into Emily's room again. She was half asleep, the lights dim. He sat beside her quietly, watching her chest rise and fall. She stirred and opened her eyes. "Hey," she whispered. He smiled. "Hey, did they catch them?" she asked. Ryan hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, they did." Her eyes softened. "Good," she said. "Then you can rest now." He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, his heart full but heavy. After a long silence, she whispered again, "You scared me." "You know." Ryan frowned gently. "I didn't mean to," she smiled weakly. "Not like that, I mean. I was afraid you'd lose yourself." He reached out and touched her hand. I almost did, he said quietly. But you pulled me back. The room fell silent again. The soft hum of the machines was the only sound. Emily closed her eyes, her fingers still resting in his. Ryan leaned back, breathing slowly. He wasn't a soldier anymore, but part of him always would be. Later that week, the case made it to court. The men pled guilty, their voices shaking. The judge called their crime cowardly and cruel. They were sentenced to years behind bars, but to Ryan, it wasn't about prison, it was about peace. After the hearing, Ryan and Emily walked outside together. She wore a small hat to cover her healing wound. He held her arm gently, guiding her down the steps. The air smelled of salt and rain again. People smiled as they passed. Quiet smiles full of respect. Emily looked up at him. So what now? Ryan thought for a moment, then said, Now we live. She smiled. Simple as that? He nodded. Simple is good. They walked along the sidewalk. The sun peeked through the clouds, touching the wet streets with gold. Ryan looked toward the ocean and whispered, Dad used to say the sea forgives everything. Emily smiled. Do you believe that? He paused, then said softly, Maybe not everything, but enough. As they reached their truck, she turned to him. Ryan, she said, you kept your promise. He looked at her gently. Always. Then he opened the door for her and they drove away, leaving behind the echoes of pain and the whispers of fear. The town would remember what happened, not as a story of violence, but of courage. Because sometimes justice doesn't wear a badge. Sometimes it wears a quiet face and sits by a hospital bed until the storm is over. A month passed. The waves returned to their gentle rhythm. The town healed slowly but surely. The fear that once lingered in every street had faded. Now people smiled again, greeted each other again. Life was coming back piece by piece. Ryan sat on the old pier one morning. The sky was soft blue. The air smelled like sea salt and coffee. He had a fishing rod in his hands. Though he wasn't really fishing, he was just sitting, breathing, existing. For the first time in a long while, that was enough. Behind him, footsteps approached. He turned and saw Emily walking toward him. She wore a light jacket, her hair tied back. The bandage on her head was gone, but the small scar remained, a reminder. Not a wound, she smiled as she reached him. You're up early, Ryan smiled back. Couldn't sleep. She sat beside him, dipping her shoes in the water. You used to come here when we were kids, she said. He nodded. Yeah. This was Dad's favorite spot. The wind blew softly. Brushing against their faces for a moment, neither spoke. They just listened to the sound of the waves and seagulls. Peace had returned, quiet, calm, and real. Emily broke the silence first. They sentenced them, didn't they? Ryan nodded. 10 years, maybe more. She looked down at the water, her reflection rippling. I don't hate them anymore, she said softly. Ryan looked at her, surprised. I'm just done carrying it, she added. He nodded slowly. That's brave. She turned to him, eyes warm. What about you, Ryan? Are you done? He thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. I don't know if I'll ever be done, he said. But I'm trying. The sun climbed higher. Light sparkled on the water like silver dust. Boats drifted lazily across the bay. Ryan leaned back, resting on his elbows. You know, he said quietly. You scared me that night. Emily smiled gently. You scared me too. He chuckled softly. Fair enough. A small breeze carried the sound of bells from the harbor. Fishermen waved from their boats. Children ran along the dock. Their laughter echoing, it was the same town. But everything felt different now. Stronger somehow. Ryan reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. It was the silver cross and her necklace. I think this belongs to you, he said. Placing it in her hand, Emily looked at it, her eyes shining. It's a little bent, she whispered. He nodded. So are we, she laughed softly, holding it against her heart. Thank you, she said. He smiled. You already thanked me by waking up. They sat there for a while. No words, no pain, no rush, just the quiet between them, warm and full, the kind of silence that heals. Later that afternoon, Ryan walked through town. People nodded respectfully as he passed. Some smiled, some whispered his name softly. He didn't want fame or praise. He just wanted to know that Emily could walk these streets safely again. He stopped by the small cafe where she used to buy coffee before her shifts. The owner, Mrs. Green, waved from behind the counter. Good to see you. Ryan, she said, and your sister, she's a miracle. Ryan smiled. She's tougher than she looks, the woman chuckled. Guess it runs in the family. When he stepped outside, he noticed a group of kids playing near the fountain. One of them dropped a toy car. Ryan bent down, picked it up, and handed it back. The boy smiled. Thanks, mister. Ryan nodded. Be careful, all right? The boy ran off laughing. Ryan watched him go, a soft smile on his face. That evening, he and Emily had dinner together by the water. Just soup and bread, the same meal she was carrying the night of the attack. She laughed when she realized it. You remembered? He grinned. I don't forget much. The sky turned orange and pink as the sun dipped behind the horizon. Emily leaned her head on his shoulder. I'm glad we're still here, she whispered. Ryan looked at the glowing,